I have the business of Skinny Dip candles. They are massage slash lotion candles. You can use the wax actually directly melted on your skin, and it's very moisturizing, contains vitamin E, actually, and antioxidants. The business was created in 2004 by Karen Porter. She was at a craft fair, and actually the soy wax candles were fairly new at that point, and they burned at a lower temperature. So she was asked to dip her finger into a soy wax candle and just prove that it's, cool enough to actually put directly on her skin. And she was the very first one to come up with any sort of massage or lotion candle. So she invented that, and then kind of due to health concerns, she passed the business on, and then it eventually came to me. I took over this last August of 2020, and just kind of really want to use this as a way to empower people to, we really try and use natural ingredients and just kind of have you embrace whoever you are. Whether that's sexuality, using the massage, or just kind of your daily life, taking a moment for yourself and just kind of enjoying what you have. Our new logo is a cheeky little gal. She's going skinny dipping. And so we kind of wanted to show that she's just like ready to jump toward joy and go for it. So that's sort of our motto.
Yeah, they're so cute. I have a few of the candles, and I was curious about, I haven't used them yet, but I was curious about the heat. And so that's interesting to know that the soy is just a much lower temperature, and where you don't have that burn factor or worry or concern. So, that's really interesting. And they smell amazing. So
we have about 35 cents and an edible line. So there's just a couple for you to choose from. You can pretty much find anything for anyone. Some of them are essential oils, some of them are fragrance oils, and we do try and put that in the description so you can kind of check those.
Awesome. And there'll be links to everything. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I'm introducing also Shari Davenport, who is a life and relationship coach in Missoula. Can you kind of tell me about your business as well?
Yeah. So I help women who are unhappy in their marriages, maybe even considering divorce. And lots of times we think that we can't make a big change in a relationship all by ourselves, but that simply isn't true. And we buy these fun products like the skinny dip candles and massage oils and things like that, but then we never get to use them because we're not getting along in our relationships. And so we miss out on so much of the fun and the joy and the very reasons that we got married when our relationship isn't going well. And so I just help people figure out how to make that relationship work, how to experience more love and more connection in their relationship. And so I, about 10, 12 years ago, went through a pretty difficult time of depression and anxiety. And as a result of that, or as a result of really trying to figure out what was wrong with me, I started to blame my husband. It was like, if he was different, everything would be better. If he would plan date nights, if he would read books, if he would do this, if he would do that, things would be different. And then I could be okay. And so that was really interesting when I was trying to change him and trying to get him to jump through my hoops. He tried for a little while, but he's like, yeah, it's not me. And it was about a 2-year journey of meeting with different marriage counselors, therapists, emotional healing people that spent a lot of time digging around in my past, trying to figure out where things went wrong. And in reality, I think the number one cause of my depression and anxiety was a poor relationship with myself. I've joked and said I used to be in an abusive relationship with me. I was always beating myself up, punching myself in the face, ridiculing. And I think that's pretty common you know, that we don't
Mhm.
like ourselves very well. We don't love ourselves very well. And consequently, we look to the outside. We look to another person to love us enough, to validate us enough, to make us feel good about ourselves.
Yeah.
And yet, there isn't enough external validation to change how we think and believe about ourselves. And I think from an opposite standpoint, my husband has always thought very lovely things about me and had more belief about me and in me than I had had about myself. And one time we were in a marriage counselor's office and she said, Jim, tell Shari what you think of her. And he goes, oh, I think she's amazing and she's pretty and she's funny and she's smart and blah, blah, blah. And the counselor said, Shari, do you realize you're shaking your head no? So as he was
Wow.
talking, I'm
Huh.
just shaking my head. And I said, well, no, I didn't realize that. But I believe he believes that stuff. He's just wrong. He's just
Oh,
biased. He's just deceived. And that was really my thought, that he was just wrong about all those things. And and this is the only takeaway I had from those meetings, but it was significant, was Shari, you have to let the good in.
mhm.
And that was something that I was really unwilling to do for a long time. And I think that shows up in just our willingness, or rather our unwillingness, to even receive a compliment.
Yeah.
We just want to push it away. And yet it's when we start letting it in, when we start believing good stuff about ourselves, that we start to change. And so that's, I see that show up with a lot of my clients, is their relationship with themselves isn't very good. And then they're looking to someone else to show up perfectly so that they can
Yeah.
feel good about themselves.
I know you and I had kind of talked about it a little bit before, but why you um, kind of went toward coaching as opposed to therapy. Can you touch on that a little bit more for me again?
Yeah, I think with kind of the difference between coaching and therapy is, coaches in general, we are helping take people to the next level. Like just in sports, it's a rare professional athlete that doesn't have coaches, several coaches probably, you know, physical, weightlifting, all those things, to help take them to the next level. And so coaching, I work with people that are already kind of at ground zero. They're healthy, they're maybe successful in all the other areas of their life except maybe relationships. And coaches really specialize. There's coaches for people with ADD, children with handicaps or challenges, parents, you know, coaches for people whose parents they're now taking care of. And so it's really specific. And therapy and counselors and stuff have more training or different training to help people who are maybe not at zero. They're maybe kind of down in the hole, and they can help get them up to ground level. And coaching kind of takes you to the next level. So we really want to discover like where you are and where you want to be, and then create that pathway and help you achieve those goals and those results that you want in your life. And I think with relationships, I mean, there's all kinds of statistics about the cost of not having good relationships, the cost to children, mental health, crime rates. I mean, all these things can go back to relationships. I've heard the statistic that when it's Mother's Day in prisons, there are thousands of cards sold to the prisoners. When it's Father's Day, nothing. And I think that kind of indicates that there's a problem when the father isn't present in the home and when there's broken homes. And then all we want, I think we're all so similar as humans, we want connection and we want love. And when that's missing, and especially missing out of the most significant relationship in our life, that's very painful and it causes lots of problems in the home. And so that's where I just realized when I had some friends that sat down with me and during my depression and my anxiety, and when I was starting to blame my husband for those problems, and they just kind of did an intervention essentially and just said, Shari, we're so afraid that if you don't get some outside help, that you're going to lose your family. We know you're reading all the books and you're listening to things and you're, maybe praying and reading and on all those things. And yet things aren't shifting. And we just we're begging you, please get some help. And I was like, you're serious, aren't you? And they said, yeah. And I knew they loved me. I think that was the big thing, is they weren't trying to manipulate me. They were for me, and they were for Jim, and they were for our family. They wanted to see us prosper and succeed, but they could see that where I was going and what I was trying to do by blaming him was not going to work, and he probably wasn't going to put up with it forever. So that was kind of an interesting time. And that's when I really did go for help. And everybody had kind of a piece of the puzzle, but I really feel if I had met with a life coach where I was trained, they would have spotted perfectionism probably in our first session. And I think a lot of us struggle with that. And I remember, talking to one of these friends, and I said, I just wish I could get it all together at the same time. And she said, well, what would it look like if you were perfect? And I said, all my nails would be the same length. I wouldn't have split ends. My house would be cleaned and organized. My children would be obeying, and, all those things. And she just looked at me and she said, if you were perfect, I don't even think I'd like you. And I think that's kind of with these Zoom calls and, how life has shifted, is that we're seeing that nobody is perfect. Nobody has it all together. And it's really kind of our flaws that actually endear us to people. Mm-hmm. I think that way. And we kind of, Lindsay and I joked beforehand that when Matthew McConaughey doesn't look that great on a Zoom call, the rest of us get a break.
Yeah, we're okay.
Yeah.
You've kind of collected a few things to sort of help with relationships, or some bullet points to go over. Do you want to start touching on some of those?
Yeah, I think with life is hard enough when we believe all the enemies live outside the walls of our home. Like this last year, we've had all these things come at us and come up that we never planned on, never expected. And all those things are difficult enough, the things we can't control. But then when we have the belief that our husband is our enemy, then things really start falling apart. Like when we think we're sleeping with the enemy, or rather not sleeping with the enemy, because that's what happens, is we don't take the time to connect or to be intimate when we're not getting along and when we're not in a close relationship. And one of the things that really contributes to that disconnection is when we blame or complain or over-explain. So blaming, complaining, or over-explaining, that can be an indicator to us that we are giving away our power and that we're not taking responsibility. Because if it's our husband's fault that we're not happy, then I'm kind of screwed. I mean, really, if he doesn't show up differently, I can't be happy. That's a very powerless position to be in. And it's not true, but we're actually taught to communicate this way. We're even taught by marriage counselors and therapists and different things to start a conversation with our husband by saying, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. So right away, we start out blaming. Mm-hmm. And the natural response when someone is blaming us or accusing us of something is to defend ourselves. We put up a guard and we're like, hey, that's very normal. That's a normal human brain responding. So we have to be aware of that. And And I'm sure you've heard advice like that, haven't you?
Yeah.
Tell your husband when he does this, it makes you feel this way. And
Mhm.
yet it's starting out the whole conversation on the wrong foot. It's starting out with accusation. And I love how Brene Brown phrases this. And she says to rather use the phrase, okay, the story I'm telling myself is this. So when you come home late, the story I'm telling myself is I don't matter.
Mhm.
And so when we start out that way, start out a conversation that way, it's one acknowledging that it is a story in your brain. It is thoughts you're telling yourself. So it's owning the fact that it's your thoughts.
Mhm.
And it's not blaming him for how you feel, because it's our thoughts that make us feel that way. When I think I don't matter to you, that's painful. But it's also just by calling it a story, it is acknowledging that it might not be true. But when
Mhm.
we tell ourselves a story long enough, it seems pretty believable.
Mhm.
And sometimes we need to get it out on the table and actually talk about it. And our husband could be like, "Oh my, not at all. I look forward to coming home, and it seems like the phone always rings as soon as I'm leaving it." And then we can have a discussion because we've started the conversation with an open hand instead of a fist. And that's when we start coming at it this way. But if just one of us opens our hand and we're vulnerable and we're honest and we're willing to own our part of it, then it changes the whole dynamic of the conversation and the relationship. And can you kind of see that? Can you kind of feel the
Yeah.
difference of how that would be?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess like my only question is like as far as saying the story I'm telling myself as if you are in a relationship that someone is like gaslighting you or something and they're like, "Oh, you need to stop feeling that way." I guess do you have some advice for kind of figuring out that sort of issue or any problems that may arise because of that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that does definitely exist. And I think so the same goes for us blaming them, that when someone else is trying to blame us, we need to be aware of that too. That when someone else is making us responsible for how they feel, well, if you wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have done this. We can kind of be onto that story. So I think really kind of being acutely aware of the blame game, whether
Mhm.
you're doing it or they're doing it, that is neither one of you taking responsibility for how you feel. And I think listening to ourselves and loving ourselves, and that's kind of where it goes back to just when I didn't like myself and
Mhm.
I didn't value my thoughts and my beliefs and my feelings, then it's so easy for someone else to come in and sabotage that. So, like with the gaslighting, and haven't studied that a ton, but it's really someone like turning the tables on you,
Mhm.
making you think it's all your fault. And that's where it almost takes like an outside, like a coach or someone that is unbiased. I think that's where friends and family have a hard time being unbiased. They have their opinion. It's like, leave him, he's a jerk, or you have to stay, you made a commitment. And that's where with a coach, the very first thing that we do in training is to be taught to stay neutral and to realize we have no idea what our client should do. But our goal is to simply help them find their thoughts, what's keeping them in that relationship. What
Mhm.
do they like? What do they fear? And I think so when that happens to you and you feel that agitation rise up or that anger, that's telling you something.
Mhm.
Our emotions are there to serve us. So they not only, emotions are like fuel that drive all our actions, they fuel all our actions, but they also reveal what we really believe. And so I think
Mhm.
we need to start paying attention to those emotions more, We don't need to react to them, but we need to take a step back and listen. It's like, what is my heart telling me right now? This doesn't seem right. Something isn't fitting together. What is that? And start to get really curious about that.
You know, your emotions are good for more than just being happy. There's a reason that you have so many. So yeah, that's interesting that you're saying, like, pay attention to all the emotions and, you know, consider what that means. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah. And I think for years, I had the belief that when I was frustrated, angry, upset, irritated, that all those were bad emotions, and that was just the bad part of me. In Christian circles, they might call that your flesh, or, just the human part of you. And yet, when we look at emotions like colors, there are no bad colors.
Mhm.
What would our world be without black? I'd eliminate half my wardrobe. I tell you that right now. Black's the new one. But all the colors are good, and all the emotions are good and have a place. Some of them feel better than others, for sure. Like love feels amazing. But that anger and that resentment and that frustration, that's trying to tell us something. It's trying to get our attention to let us know something's off here. Something's wrong. What do I need to look at? And I think if we can just, probably the number one thing is to slow down and watch your thoughts. When we blame and complain or over-explain, we're giving our power away. We're giving it to someone else, and we're not taking responsibility. And so another way to look at the word responsibility is taking back our ability to respond. So we can choose and we can decide how we want to respond, how we want to show up in the relationship, in the world, and in life. And that is what responsibility is. It's taking responsibility for how I act, for what I say, for what I do, and not blaming anybody else. And that is such a powerful position to do that. And it also, when we're taking responsibility, the chances of someone else taking responsibility is far greater, because we've just changed the environment of the relationship, of the conversation. So if my husband says to me, "You left the food out last night," if I go, "Well, who said it was my job to put it away," or whatever, then that starts doing this. But if he were to say, "You left the food out last night," and I go, "Oh, shoot, I did. I'm so sorry. Never even thought of it again." No fight. It's over. It's resolved. And then we can have the conversation. It's like, yeah, maybe let's make sure one of us is putting it away next time, or whatever. And so it's so interesting how these little things can just turn into these big fights. But if I interpret his saying, "Hey, you didn't put the food away last night," as something's wrong with me, and I'm inadequate, and I'm not good enough, and I'm a failure, then it starts turning into a fight.
Yeah. Well, and that's also kind of saying, as you are creating a response, not a reaction, whereas, where you actually get to choose what you're doing rather than just.
Yeah. And it seems like the fist is the most powerful stance, but the open hand is actually what changes everything. And it's so powerful. And I mean, you can just kind of see that conversation when I go, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Then he doesn't have to have a guard up either. And he could come back and say, "I guess I could have put it away too." It's so interesting when you start showing up different. It's like, I'll tell people, it's like you kind of, when a relationship isn't working, it's like you have this dance going on where you keep stepping on each other's toes. But we have the ability, just as one person, to change the music and start changing the dance. And I had one client client whose husband had kicked her out of the house and filed for a divorce, got a restraining order and everything. And she wasn't even allowed to talk to him. And as we just worked on her thoughts and her feelings and how she was showing up in the world, and she just got essentially healed and started to love herself, everything shifted. And he finally was like, can we talk? And they got to back together and are doing great. And I never met with him. I just met with her. And it's just so powerful when we just do our own work to love ourselves. That's probably the biggest thing, is we don't love ourselves enough. I think that's a big thing. And her testimony is on my website, which is lovefeelsbetter.com. lovefeelsbetter.com, or at sharidavenportcoaching.com. But there's so many different ways to spell Shari. We thought we'd get a different URL there.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I think relationships are so important. And I mean, especially after 2020, we've kind of seen even, what's happened if you have fewer people around you, or even not being able to see them in person, or, we've heard both good and bad stories of people, especially partners, when living together and they'd spend so much more time together. Some people, they're like, okay, this is not working. And other people, they're like, oh, it turns out this is great. And we actually needed more time together. And so it's been a good and bad, I guess, exploration of kind of relationships. So it's just, they're so important. And I thank you so much for telling us all of this information. This is awesome.
I think one more little item is just with 2020, it's a little bit like PMS. Like PMS kind of just magnifies what's already there. And like a magnifying glass, it can't magnify nothing. So when we run into situations like 2020 or challenges or whatever, it tends to just show us what's really there. And that's where, when there is that real love and that real connection, that's what's magnified. But when there's already discord and bitterness and anger towards each other, then those life challenges can magnify that. And again, paying attention to that can serve us. That's where we can start cleaning that stuff up and start to really love and connect with each other the way that we all really want to. So when we experience someone pushing our buttons, or we're triggered or something like that, it's so easy to just think, if they would stop saying that, if they would stop asking me to watch their kids, or, whatever, we just think that the other person needs to stop what they're doing when we are triggered or when they push our button. But the key thing to remember is, it's your button. You can do whatever you want with it. And if you were to get rid of that button, nobody could push it. And I had a button that I wanted people to believe that I was a good mom. And so whenever someone made a comment that maybe indicated that they thought I could be doing something better, boy, did that push my button and hard, and I would react. But if I just believed that I was a good mom, or at least I was a good enough mom, or the mom my kids needed, then people would be free to think whatever they wanted about me, and it wouldn't impact me. It was so interesting. And so when we have a belief about ourselves that we're not good enough, or that we're not measuring up in some way, then anything, like we could be cut off in traffic, like someone just didn't see us, but our brain can interpret that as, see, nobody sees me. I'm not good enough. I don't even matter on the road. It's so fascinating. And so when someone pushes your button, that is an opportunity to slow down and ask yourself, what is that button? What is the thought that's triggering that emotion in me, that defensiveness, that anger, that hurt? And then we can go about kind of getting rid of that button to start changing our beliefs about ourselves. Because if someone accused me of being a terrible attorney, I'd be like, oh, that's so interesting you say that. Why do you think I'm a terrible attorney? Well, you've never won a case. I'm like, that's true. I'm not an attorney. So that whatever they would say wouldn't land on me at all. They're just have a thought error. And so when something kind of triggers us or bothers us, it's because part of us believes that it's true. And that's what we kind of need to discover and kind of get healing from and start to change how we think about ourselves and get rid of the buttons.